Actually, full disclosure, I do like Hawaiian pizza. God. I know that's a very divisive issue, but I do like pineapple pizza. I will have it if it's served to me.
We're getting nowhere with this. I thought we were trying to drill down to fundamental truth.
All right, the hierarchy is collapsing here. So. Hello, welcome everyone to the Navigating an Ancient Faith podcast. It's cool we're sitting in the same room right now.
Yeah, there we go.
Because we just got back from a fantastic conference.
Yes, busy weekend. It was fun.
It was. It was fun. We actually thought we might be able to record this whole series being together at the conference, but the conference, I think, so overloaded both of our minds every evening that
instead of coming back to the hotel room and recording, we would go grab a bite and sit there for 5 hours and talk about what we'd had
try and process everything. Yeah.
So anyway, we didn't have a chance to get to much of it, but here we are. So this is going to work.
Yeah. So our heads might be filled with a lot of different ideas as we record this next series, but that's okay. It's something I was processing about, well, let's face it, our culture today is very confused about what truth is.
Oh, yeah, sure, no kidding.
And so I've seen these switches going on that we'll get into in this first part today. Seen these switches going on versus the religious realm that says, nope, there's only one truth and here's how you know it.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm just processing this myself. I guess this is one of these truly just a result of me processing, writing things down. And then this is, of course, something that you and I have talked about, because I think I wrote some of this down probably last year. You looked in and said, man, I really like this. We should talk about this.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, you're right. I mean, it seems like, I don't think we'd be having this conversation 20 years ago. I think pretty much everybody agreed on generally what truth was. But yeah, we seem to have lost our way when it comes to establishing what fundamental truths are out there. So yeah, maybe it's sad that we have to revisit this.
Yeah, well, I guess I would say it represents a little bit of my own growth in thinking too.
Yeah.
And hopefully people will take it as growth.
Yeah.
So, we're going to talk today about kind of this, what is truth, and this idea of a hierarchy of truth. Now that right there might freak some people out.
Right.
But let us explain, stick with us here.
No, it's good. It was very helpful when I read through it. I thought, I think you're onto something here.
Okay, yeah. And then next episode, we're going to really talk about more the way this is presented, I think, in the Bible, which is Paul's message at the Areopagus in Athens. So I think that'll be fun too.
Right.
You and I stood on that very hill and slipped off it like everyone else did. We'll get into that next episode. We almost died
there. Yeah, we'll hold on to that one.
Yeah, let's not run down that rabbit trail this episode. I guess just to jump in, when we talk about what is truth, of course, that's Pilate's famous question to Jesus, right?
Sure. What is truth anyway?
Yeah.
What are you even talking about?
Yeah, what are you even talking about?
Right. We all know that and it's interesting that in Pilate's time was sort of the golden era of philosophy, and so it actually doesn't surprise me that I just made the comment that we wouldn't be having this discussion 20 years ago.
Right.
But it's actually an ancient discussion on a deeper level. I just think average people 20, 25 years ago would say, look, I've got my opinions. I like this type of pizza and you like that type of pizza. That's an opinion.
Yeah.
The truth, which way is north and is the sky blue? I mean, there's nothing to argue there. But anyway, this goes way back. We started by saying it's a problem in our modern time, but it's certainly an ancient debate that's been going on for centuries and centuries.
No, that's right. So Pilate's question really comes out of the previous 400 years of maybe Greek philosophy, where they wrote books on this. They would sit around and talk about this idea, of what is the highest level of thinking that can actually be established as, maybe in Plato especially, Aristotle, you could see it as scientific fact. How can we establish these things?
Right.
And so what is the proper way to think about these things?
Yeah.
And so, you're right. This debate went back thousands of years.
Right.
And so when Pilate comes along, and we're going to read this in a minute, he's echoing the previous 400 years of what has been going around in philosophical circles.
My theory is Pilate had just heard a podcast, and he's trying to flex on
Okay.
Dude, I just heard this crazy podcast. What is truth anyway? That's all that's going on.
Yeah, you think Pilate had that in his back pocket for a while. And he said,
he's been dying to drop it out, throw it out
This is the perfect mic drop moment here.
He'd been driving his wife crazy, talking about truth at home because he had read a book. And she's like, I don't care. Take out the garbage.
Yeah, right, exactly. Did you ever listen to that podcast I told you to listen to? No, the kids don't take care of themselves.
That's right. So, yeah, we can run down that avenue a little bit philosophically. And Pilate was definitely probably a product of his time. And I'm sure he had these deep debates in the city square along with the other philosophers.
Yeah. So let's jump in and read this interaction between Jesus and Pilate. We're just going to catch the tail end of it. But it's in John 18, verses 36 through 38. So Jesus is standing before Pilate. Of course, Jesus has been arrested at this point. Right. The leaders have dragged him before Pilate. And so Jesus has been talking. He's been, can't really say defending himself, because in some way Jesus actually doesn't offer a defense of himself.
Right.
Right? So Jesus starts off by saying, my kingdom is not of this world. Of course, that right there is a very threatening phrase to say to someone in the Roman Empire.
Well, to claim you have a kingdom at all.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
Pilate would immediately think, okay, rival kingdom.
Right.
This has to be squashed.
Yeah, exactly.
So Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. So Pilate then says, oh, so you are a king then? And Jesus answered, which I like how Jesus answers, well, you say that I am a king. Your word's not mine. Right?
Yeah. You said it, not me.
In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Okay, so there's that first word. Right. That's why I came into this world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And then Pilate's famous response, what is truth? Yeah. What is truth anyway?
That's what I take it. What is truth anyway?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
So Jesus basically claims to testify to the truth, and then said, everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
Yeah, which is a pretty bold statement. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think, my guess is Pilate kind of listened to it and just kind of rolled his eyes at that statement.
Yeah.
Like, everybody who's right is on my side. It's like, okay, yeah, that's the way that works.
In some sense, you can almost see Jesus talking about a kingdom and a king and red flags for Pilate, right?
Right.
But then Jesus says, everyone who follows me is following the truth, and I come to proclaim the truth. And he maybe thought, well, this guy's a little bit nuts, but harmless.
I was about to say, you haven't been in many kingdoms, if that's what you think, that everyone in this kingdom's always right or always speaks the truth. It's like, yeah, you haven't run a kingdom very long, have you?
And your kingdom's not of this world. Yeah, okay. I get what's going on here, type of thing.
Yeah. But no, it does have the philosophical tones to it. He's kind of throwing it out there, what is truth anyway?
Yeah.
As a pretty quick retort, and that opens up where we're going today.
Yeah.
Because what is truth?
Yeah,
that's the age-old question.
Right? We're still trying to, about? And we will solve that problem in 2 episodes.
2 episodes, yep.
That's ambitious. No, so I thought it was interesting because Pilate, I think, really represents what you hear a lot today, which is, well, the whole postmodern thing that's maybe coming full circle to an end.
Yeah.
As it kind of teeters and looks like it might collapse in on itself, but that's a little rabbit trail. Yeah. But yeah, Pilate represents this whole, what is truth anyway? Okay, you have your truth, I have mine. What's the big deal? Who are you to tell me that my truth is wrong, right?
Yeah, it comes from that idea of truth is nothing more than opinion
at
the fundamental level. I guess, the postmodernists would agree, yeah, look, we all know that there's scientific truths that can be proven, but really anything as far as good, evil, love, that's just somebody's opinion. Or maybe just chemicals bouncing around, I don't know.
Yeah, and the postmodern narrative is that there is no meta-narrative. There is no grand story that explains what's going on in our world, which the classic comeback then is that definition is itself a meta-narrative.
Right.
So
that's right. Well, yeah, the world is only what we perceive.
Yeah.
It's only your opinion on what you're perceiving.
Yes. And so then I think Jesus represents what we take as the religious view, which is, look, there is an objective truth.
Right.
It's sometimes from a religious standpoint, we say, look, it's pretty obvious. You believe this or you're wrong.
Sure. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Right. Jesus said that.
Sure. Maybe the religious view is there is an objective truth and we can know what that is.
Yeah.
Okay. And postmodern says, look, you can never be sure about anything. It's all subjective. It's all processed through your own mind, what's going on in the world. And so we can all for a time agree that these scientific quote unquote truths are accurate, but different time, different place, those things can change.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that represents the wide gulf between the two.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Pilate and Jesus.
Right. And those two are completely incompatible, right?
Well, yeah. What we're going to talk about today, though, is that there might be a way to bridge that gulf. Because, look, what happens is, to the extreme, the postmodern basically renders everything meaningless, right? It's day out. It looks day out to me, but to a postmodern, well, that's your opinion. The problem is that doesn't work very well as you go about your life trying to function in the world.
Right. Well, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the postmodern extremes kind of on the fringe claim things, I can just say whatever I want to and embody that, and everybody else has to play my game by my rules. That's the problem with it. If you believe you're something else, then that's fine. That's your business. But it's when you start demanding that everybody play your game, that you have a multiplicity of opinions and games about what I view about myself, and therefore we just devolve into chaos with that way, because it's just, I have no idea what game I'm playing, how to treat you, how you view yourself. I can't read your mind.
Right.
But yet there's all these offenses that are given when you refuse to play the other person's game.
Yeah. And so then the other side of this gulf is what we might say is religious truth, and people of faith, well-meaning, kind of looked to what Jesus said and said there's a completely objective truth. And part of the claim is that, and we possess it, right?
Well, we were talking about that this morning. Yeah, that kind of denominational argument between denominations, certainly between different religions, but that, that fundamental dogmatism that says, I agree with what you think about Jesus, but I don't agree with what you think about infant baptism or once saved, always saved, or
once we start to get to the finer points of all this.
But you're right. It all comes down, fundamentally, all those disagreements come down to there is an objective truth and there is a right way. Either you can baptize an infant and it be effective, or it doesn't do anything and you're just wasting your time, right? I mean, so it all comes down to this fundamental idea of objective truth, and there is a right way to view it and a wrong way to view it. And that's what we disagree even within the faith.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
So I think there's another modern problem here. Now, spoiler alert, you and I believe that there is objective truth.
Right. Well, you do.
Oh, okay. That's my truth.
I'm an antagonist, right? So that's
right,
that's true about me. So
my truth is that I believe there is an objective truth. So let's go with that.
Sure.
So we'll throw that out at the beginning here, because I think there's a modern problem that I've seen the way actually religious people take this thing that we hold to as their objective truth,
right,
and don't communicate it in a very, or let's say it this way, they communicate it in a very rational, scientific way. And so what this comes out is that if there's an objective truth, then we should be able to prove it scientifically, it should be historically verifiable, and it should be factually correct.
Right? And I think that's a mistake.
Right, yeah. Okay, so why do you think that's a mistake? Yeah.
Well, because you're basically playing the game of the postmodernists. You're playing the game by the postmodernist rules that says that says unless it's verifiable, unless it's material, unless we can test it, then it can't be true. It's only subjective.
Yeah, okay.
And when you play that game, then look, if you're a person of faith, that word faith, what does that mean? It means you're not going to prove it. You're accepting something.
Right.
So the definition of faith is the evidence of things unseen. Right. So, it's like you can't put your hands around it anyway. And so, therefore, when you're playing by the rules of the postmodernists, that's where I think we get messed up because, and I forget who we heard a podcast, somebody mentioned this, but me and you kind of got on a riff about it, is that when you see these debates, and I love them, the debates of a person of faith with an atheist, right at the beginning, you can see if the person of faith insists on playing by the rules of the postmodernist or the atheist, you already see this is about to be a train wreck. It's about to go sideways. But when you see the people kind of approach these debates as saying, look, let's establish what truth is. Let's establish that there are things that can't be seen, but that everybody universally feels, like love. Or, once you start that, then you see the atheist foundation start to crumble. And so you kind of see this back and forth. So, to go back to your original question, the mistake that the person of faith makes trying to play in the arena of only the scientific, material, provable world.
Yeah.
It undermines the definition of your faith. And so there are some things, and we'll get into some of this stuff. I mean, look, there's always these conflicting views when it comes to things like creationism, or we talk about it in medical debates when it talks about, life-saving procedures. Should a family be forced to give their child life-saving procedures if their faith is against it? We do have these scientific arenas that we debate in, but that can't be our foundation. That can't be where we start when it comes to objective truth.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's a difficult.
Yeah. And I would say, just to clarify something, I think you're mentioning two different things, or I would put it in two different categories, because you mentioned the postmodern.
Right.
You start from the postmodern perspective, which is different from the rational scientific Enlightenment worldview of the last 500 years. But the issue you're talking about is we enter into debates and conversations almost automatically playing by their rules.
Right.
By the rules of the postmodernists, or by the rules of, you might say, the rational scientific,
that's
atheist kind of person. Yeah.
And when you're debating 7 24-hour-day creation, it's understood those are the rules that we're going to abide by.
Yeah.
I'm not even trying to say this is just my supernatural way I view this. It's you are trying. I mean, it is a scientific debate, so that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think the larger things of faith, when it comes to, is there a God or isn't there, or is there a purpose to my life, or is this all some accident? I think you have to step outside of that postmodern framework, postmodern foundation.
Yeah.
You have to go to something higher than that to be able to start those conversations, which is why so many of those conversations devolve into this idea of, well, what is truth anyway? Exactly what Pilate said.
Yeah.
And we've seen debates where it's kind of like, you're pumped up, you're like, oh, let's see how this goes. And then you listen to it and you're like, well, all they did was argue for 2 hours about what is truth anyway, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There you go. They need to listen to this podcast of what needs to happen.
Yeah. And so when that happens, and we've seen this play itself out probably the last 50, 100 years, is that's where you get into this whole conflict between religion and science, right?
Right.
And I think part of what we're saying is because religion is almost conceded to play by the rules of the rational scientific mindset.
Right.
And so that's where we can come up with a lot of examples of this. But for example, if you say there was a global flood,
right,
all a scientist has to do is prove, however dubious that might be,
right,
that there isn't. Or a better way to say that is, if the scientist says, well, the evidence doesn't suggest that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And there's 1,000 examples of this. Then all of a sudden, you're attacking my faith, because my faith is now in conflict with science. And I guess what I'm processing through is there a way around that? Or is that a result, and I think it is, of playing by the rules of the rational scientific Enlightenment mindset?
Right. And we've all kind of had these crises of faith, crises of truth, where the evidence seems to undermine what I thought about this. And it can be something as simple as, I thought we get to the store by going left, you thought we go right, and we go right, and dadgummit, you were right. So that's a minor adjustment where I really thought that it was left, but man, I was just wrong. I guess, adjustment. But when you talk about foundational beliefs and things like that, it can really kind of be jarring and kind of be a little bit, it can be disorienting, because you have to readjust what you fundamentally thought was true, or you become dogmatic and you just say, I don't care what the evidence says. I'm holding on to what I fundamentally believe is true.
Yeah. And that's a typical reaction, I think, of a lot of people.
Right. Okay, so how do we navigate through this then?
Yeah, so what's the way forward then? How do we get out of that? Because I don't know about you. Well, I do know about you because we've had these conversations. I've just grown tired of these debates. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
The whole, well, science says this, and that disproves what the Bible says here. Well, now do I have to reevaluate my faith? No, there's going to be more evidence, just you wait. Or kind of retreat back into my, plug my ears, la, 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 I don't care what you're saying.
Right.
I just think there's a better way forward. And so I think there's a way to think of truth as a hierarchy.
Okay.
Now, it does not mean everything is mutually exclusive or relative. I'll say that at the outset. But I think there's a hierarchy. And in fact, a good way to introduce this might be something we just heard at this conference, all due props, which is this idea of objective truth.
Right.
And that was a really good talk that we heard. But
well, we heard a talk on objective history.
Yes, but it applies to this.
Of thinking that there's such thing as objective history. And so we started out that, and it does apply to truth. But one of the quote that I loved is, you can't look at something from nowhere. You're always looking from a point. You're always looking from an angle. You're always looking from wherever. You can't record something from nowhere. You have the camera set up somewhere. When you talk about history, the idea of let's get history right. What really happened? What's truth? Well, everything is coming from a particular angle, and it becomes, history is written because it's functional, because it explains my story or my people's story.
Yes.
And so it's always written from that, even today. And so this idea of, well, we need more objective journalism. Well, I agree with the statement, but if you think that you can actually get to objective truth or objective history, you can have two people look at the exact same video evidence of something and have two different opinions. We know that.
Yeah.
And so, the idea of objective history is a little bit dubious to begin with, because it's always going to be processed the way I process it through my experiences, what I've gone through.
Yeah. We hold that there used to be this idea of objective news. Right. And the reality is there really was no such thing as objective news, because it all comes from a certain angle.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean to say that they can try to be as objective as possible.
Sure, you can be more objective.
Yeah.
But the idea of absolute objectivism.
You can eliminate a lot of subjectivity. You can eliminate propaganda. You can eliminate going, I'm going to tell this because I have this agenda in mind.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's still coming from your subjective viewpoint.
Right. CNN isn't objective. I always thought CNN was objective.
Well, I want to shatter an illusion you hold here.
Don't do it. I'll have to reevaluate
they
my
may
fundamental
not be
truth.
objective. I also have a news flash, and maybe this might send your world crumbling. Fox News is not objective either.
Don't go there. Sacrilege. All right, we're done.
Now, PBS, I think, says they're objective, so the jury's still out there.
Right. But we're kind of kidding around here, but we're getting to that point about, this idea that even in the news we watch, people's opinions are, hey, this is what I watch because this is the truth. They don't cover up the truth. And I think hopefully we're all mature enough to realize that there is no objective in modern news. But it is that idea of we need to get back to objective truth. Well, we can be more objective, but it's all going to be coming from somewhere. So I don't think you can reach that pinnacle.
Right. And what do you mean by it's coming from somewhere? So what we mean by that is that, look, we are saying that there is such thing as an objective truth. However, it will always be interpreted by human beings, which brings a level of subjectivity into it.
That's what I was trying to say. No, that's the way to say it.
Yeah.
There is objective truth. It just won't be understood subjectively by us, by the individual.
Yeah.
Right.
In the same way that you could say there is objective history, but as soon as I stand anywhere to try and interpret it, it becomes subjective.
Yeah, that's right.
Could say that.
And it's processed through your experience and the understanding of what you think this person was trying to do.
Yeah.
Because we can't be in other people's heads either. So we can have the facts of a war or a battle, but I don't know what Nero was thinking. I don't know what. So you can't have that layer either. All you can do is look at the material evidence of it, and you might get that right, but it's still not going to point to any absolute truth. It's always going to be seen subjectively.
Right.
Okay, so I like that. No, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's kind of a good framework for what I want to talk about here, is this idea of a hierarchy of truth.
Okay.
I think that's a good framework, because as soon as you say a hierarchy of truth, you go, well, okay, now I thought there was one truth.
Than the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay, so the hierarchy is attempt to maybe, let's think about this, maybe to prioritize the subjectivity that we necessarily bring into it in a way to kind of order what we're seeing in the world.
Right. Okay.
Maybe that's a way to talk about it, right?
Right.
So what would be at the bottom of the hierarchy? And we're moving up, right? So
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Okay.
Your absolute, what you need is food, water, and air, right?
Right.
And if you don't get that, then there's no need of talking about self-actualization and greater purpose, right? You have to handle the first things first.
And that's, so that's necessary,
right?
But it's not the most important.
It's not the highest.
It's not the highest.
It's not the highest.
Yeah.
Well, let me move on to that, because I don't think we're saying the exact same thing.
Okay.
But I do think at the bottom of, I would say, the hierarchy of truth is probably my personal experience, my personal opinion.
I will put that at the bottom. And to go back to your idea of Maslow,
right,
that is fundamental to everyone, right? It doesn't do any good to say, I don't have a personal experience of anything.
Right.
So maybe that's fundamental. It sits at the bottom.
Right. It's how everything has to be processed.
But you can't stay there. Life is more than just sitting there. Life is more than just eating food and drinking water.
Right.
And breathing air.
Yeah.
Because you could say that's the most fundamental.
Right.
But, I mean, hey, we're here on this earth to do a lot more than that. Right.
Right.
Okay. So that's maybe a way to reconcile
because we all
that.
have these opinions that feel innate. They feel obvious to us, but sometimes we have trouble explaining them or defending them or verbalizing exactly what's going on with our feelings. Some people are better than others, but we all know that it's universal. We all know that that's how we process it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's a good way of establishing the bottom layer of truth, because it's something everybody experiences. But then, right away, you have this whole pushback of my truth. Well, this is my truth, and so you deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And the person of faith has problem with that because they're saying, look, truth is not relative, it's objective, and when you start with your opinion, all you're saying is your truth is your opinion. So therefore it's not truth, it's just your opinion, right?
Yeah.
But the good thing about that is it's so easily relatable. Everybody knows that the way you were raised affects the way you view things. If me and you were born in a third world country, as brothers, we would view the world radically different than the way we view it. And I don't think anybody argues that at all. And so we do have to filter it through our personal experience. So I would say, yes, that's definitely the bottom.
Yeah, so the bottom's personal experience. Yeah. And I think what's important to note is this hierarchy acknowledges that that's legit. And one of the things you have said several times is when you say that phrase, well, that's my truth, we'll use this word, that's legit. There's truth to that.
Right.
But sometimes we want to discount that because we go, no, that's just your opinion. But let's do an example. We were grabbing coffee this morning. It's like, I like pepperoni on my pizza, and you mentioned to me putting honey on pizza.
My daughter does that, yes.
Okay.
Has a honey pizza.
I'm still trying to wrap my mind around.
It's a complete bastardization of pizza.
Okay.
That's what she likes, right?
So you could say, well, you would like honey on your pizza. And I would say, man, I'm a pepperoni guy. That's my truth, right?
Right.
And we could argue, you'd say, well, that's your opinion. But look, it's true to me. I might be able to even try honey on pizza, and I don't like it. So it would be true,
right,
in a certain sense, in this base level of personal experience, right, that my truth is I like pepperoni on my pizza, and I don't like honey.
Right.
Apologies to your daughter.
Right. No apology needed, because I've told her myself. Right. Yeah. So the good thing is we've all experienced it. The bad thing is that it elevates our emotions to some sort of ultimate truth.
Right.
That's the mistake that we make. So it is part of the hierarchy. It's just at the fundamental bottom level. That's how we process anything.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's making sense.
And that's the important thing then about this hierarchy. So what we're saying is that that's not an illegitimate way to think about things, is your personal truth. However, it is not the most important way to think about things.
Right. It's not the ultimate thing.
And let's kind of summarize this and be honest. Look, this is the postmodern problem, is that everything is your personal truth, and that's the highest thing on the hierarchy, right?
Right. It puts it at the top.
It puts it at the top.
Right, which is the problem. That's the problem that we run into, that I demand you view truth through my filter.
Right.
And that's obviously ridiculous. That's non-functional at every level, right?
Right. And that's where you get into the preference on what you like on your pizza versus whether it's day or night time outside right now.
Right.
Is on the same level.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It's interesting. It's a silly analogy, but in a way it's not. It's saying that I prefer pepperoni pizza, therefore there should be no other pizza.
Right.
When that hierarchy is flipped, that pepperoni is the best pizza, and it is, by the way, that that when I demand that and say that therefore everybody has to play by my rules, isn't it a way of saying there should be no olives on pizza, and there shouldn't, by the way?
Well, I think what it actually does is it pulls higher level things down to the level of pizza preference.
Yeah.
Is maybe a better way to think about that.
Right. Okay.
Because true postmodern would say, no, put whatever you want. Put, God forbid, pineapple on your pizza. Actually, full disclosure, I do like Hawaiian pizza. God. I know that's a very divisive issue, but I do like pineapple pizza. I will have it if it's served.
We're getting nowhere
to me.
with this. I thought we were trying to drill down to fundamental truth.
All right, the hierarchy is collapsing here. So, all right,
okay, but no, we can agree
in.
that yes, at the bottom of the hierarchy is personal preference, or I shouldn't say personal preference, personal truth. Yeah, preference is a wrong word. Personal truth, because if you grew up in a home with an abusive father and a drug addict mother and witnessed drug use, things like that in and out of the house, it will change your truth. It doesn't change your opinion. Well, it changes that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, you really are coming from a completely different worldview understanding than someone who's not raised in that element. And so it really does affect your fundamental truth. And so there is your truth, and we're okay with that, even though I think, like we've said before, I think the faith community pushes back at that. You know, there is no such thing as my truth.
Yeah.
Right? But I think there is. But as long as it's understood as in the hierarchy. So that's at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's at the bottom. And a way to wrap this up, I guess, and we'll move on to the next one, but looking at some of my notes that I made. But I think Plato has an interesting illustration just to show, again, that this conversation goes back 2,500 years, right?
Right.
So Plato has this illustration of a chariot driver. He would say that's the mind. And he has two horses, right? Mm-hmm. And one is kind of wild and untamed. And the other, he's tamed. And the idea is that the one horse is your emotion and the other horse is your reason.
Okay. That's Jonathan Haidt, the writer in The Elephant.
Yeah, right? That's just a modern version of that.
Right. Okay.
And the idea,
he ripped that off from Plato? See, I thought that was original.
I think there's a lot that's ripped off from Plato when you actually start
that's probably true.
Reading Plato. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That there's a rider, the logical thinking part, and then there's the wild elephant. And I like Height's because the rider, in some regard, is no match for the power of the elephant.
Right.
So our emotions are extremely powerful.
Yes.
But a proper rider, positioned in the right way, can control the elephant.
Yes.
And decide where to go. Here's where we're going. So, yeah, Plato's two horses. I like that.
But yeah, so it's the acknowledgement, I guess what we're saying is that our emotions play a very powerful role in the moment. And if our emotions are what define truth,
right,
what I feel in the moment right now,
right,
then you're in for a wild ride. Right.
Yeah,
that elephant's going to go wherever it wants.
Yeah.
Or to Plato's example, that wild horse is going to take the lead, and who knows where that thing's going to drag you.
Right. Which is why every grandmother in our lives say, don't let your emotions get the best of you, right? Don't be controlled by your emotions. It has its place, but don't let that be the fundamental way that you view and operate and navigate the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's no way to navigate the world.
Right.
But someone who sits at the bottom of this hierarchy and says, my truth is all there is, that's what they're doing, basically.
Right. Okay.
They're at the whim of the elephant, stampeding wherever the elephant wants to go.
Right.
All right. So let's move up a hierarchy. That's what a hierarchy is. Let's move up the level.
Okay.
I would say that the next level up is universally observable scientific truth, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think everyone would say, yes, there's scientific truth. And in fact, some people might go, finally, they got there, right?
Right.
They've got
right. But it's not the top. We're not there yet.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's the difference.
Spoiler alert, we're not at the top yet.
Right. Yeah.
But I look outside right now and it looks light out. It's daytime.
Right.
And I don't care what you feel.
Right.
I'm going to assert that it's daytime out.
Right.
Right?
There are observable facts. The earth is round. It's
we
not
can prove
flat.
these things.
There are weather patterns.
Yeah.
There's math, right? That all these things are observable and provable.
I was going to say 2 + 2 = 4, but in our crazy world right now,
that is your opinion.
That's my opinion, right?
Merely your opinion.
But when it actually comes to navigating through the world, that's where I think it's cool that when it actually comes to navigating through the world, 2 + 2 = 4. And that's the best way to navigate the world. Even if you're sitting there going, well, my opinion is it's 5. Well, try to pay for two $2 items.
Right. Yeah.
By thinking it's 3. It's just not going to work.
Right.
So,
and it's worth saying, because we are navigating an ancient faith.
Yeah.
This is a new issue. So we have so much technology around us. It seems so obviously to say, yeah, duh, there's scientific truths, because how does the internet work without it? But you go back 1,000 years, probably less than that, a couple hundred years, and there's not much science. There are seasons, there are things that are observable that everybody universally understands, but just the rigorous science that absolutely this happens every time this happens. That didn't happen much in the world outside of the natural cycles of weather and things like that.
Yeah.
So back in Plato's time, this wasn't as obvious as we make it out now. It's so obvious in our world when you have vehicles driving down roads. Well, you couldn't do that without science. And that's correct. But 200 years ago, it was a little bit different world. The Industrial Revolution hadn't hit. And so it's a much less scientific world. And it was much more subjective. They had to have another way of evaluating truth. They knew that the personal subjective wasn't right because there's just too many multiplicity of opinions on things.
Yeah.
But they didn't have that scientific rigor before people like Galileo and, the early scientists, the scientific revolution.
Yeah, it was starting. So, in fact, when you read Plato, it goes back to Pythagoras, that well-known name, is the development of math. And in some ways, they actually saw everything as math.
Right. Because that was the ultimate science of their time.
Right. And so it's funny to even see developing, some of these early Greek philosophers trying to push everything to a math problem, right?
Right.
You falling in love, well, I can make that into a math problem somehow, right?
Right.
Or music. That was the other thing. There was a correct way to do music because it followed a math formula, right?
Yeah.
And so you see that, and then you see Aristotle starting to make scientific observations. And so they were starting to develop this, but I think what you're saying is when the Enlightenment comes along, we finally get to a point where we say, this is it. This is the highest truth.
Science wins.
Yes.
Right. This is the ultimate truth.
Yeah.
And the problem with science is, even though it's provided all this incredible technology, is that it confines all reality to the provable and to the repeatable. Right.
Yeah.
And even the ancient Greeks, before the scientific revolution, they knew that that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Completely. Right.
Yeah.
And so, okay. Yeah.
So, and I think you can see this kind of playing itself out. Again, maybe this is my personal truth, but you see this running its course in this idea that we've heard in the last 5 years, look, trust the science, trust the science.
Sure.
And people are starting to go, wait a minute, this can't be the highest thing.
Right.
Right? Because science, for all the good that it has done, is subject to the same subjectivity.
If you don't think that it can be politically hijacked,
right,
just like everything else, then you're a fool.
If you don't think science is fallible.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And look, this is so obvious in some ways because we think we know science, and you can do this in any field. We go, well, this is scientific fact, until something comes along 10 years from now and says, no, actually,
right,
Pluto isn't a planet. Right?
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, so science suffers from the same thing that, I'll just say extreme faith suffers from. The idea that, well, just wait, the facts will come along.
Yeah.
Like, so when you say trust the science and it's disproven, then it's like, well, we just didn't have all the facts, but don't worry, we will have complete and absolute scientific knowledge one day. Just like the asterisks that the person of faith can put into any argument is, or I may not be able to prove this right now, but one day we will have the enlightenment and the understanding that what I believe as truth has been right all along.
Yeah.
So they both suffer from, it's interesting, they both suffer from this idea of one day we'll have better knowledge, we'll be more enlightened.
Yeah.
And that actually points to the fact that, well, okay, so your science is not absolute. Your science isn't completely objective. It's not the highest order of truth, because you're constantly pointing to one day we will have it.
Yeah, one day I will be vindicated, shaking my fist,
right.
And
yeah, that's actually funny. A pretty strong argument that you're not at the top of the hierarchy.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're starting to build the hierarchy up now. And again, we're not arguing anti-science, right? Science has provided so much. But the problem is when you think that's at the top of the hierarchy, what happens when the science starts to fail you? And look, we're more than just scientific creatures.
Right.
We're more than just biological organisms in this scientifically provable material world, I guess is
right.
a way to say it. We're more than that, right?
Yeah.
So let's keep going up the hierarchy. What's next then?
Well, one more thing I want to say about science. The more technologically advanced we get, the more you actually see that something like AI is not fundamentally a good thing, right? We don't know. We don't know how this is going to...
We don't know, yeah,
vehicles,
exactly.
Obviously, vehicles have completely... the internal combustion engine has completely transformed how we move items and get from place to place. I flew down here in just a couple hours, right? But what you see is it kills thousands of people a year in car wrecks, right?
Yeah.
So the more technologically advanced we get, the more we see this dichotomy between, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing? We talked about this on our AI episode. Is AI going to be the great savior and enlighten, lift us all up to, enlightened thinking? Or is it going to be this awful thing that's going to take over our world, right?
Yeah.
And
well, just ask Google Gemini.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, there you go. Go there.
It'll tell you. I didn't mean to derail your thought. But.
No, it's proving my thought. The idea, if you think that science, something as cool and as innovative as AI, is immune from political bias or
human flaw.
Then take a look at Google Gemini and Google George Washington and tell me what you see, right? And that, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, the more technology, the more science advances, the more we actually see the moral division between what this breakthrough technology can offer.
Yeah, okay. So that actually reinforces the need for something higher on the hierarchy.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it points to something higher.
Okay. And so I think we could say that the next rung on the hierarchy is, you might say, philosophical truth, or the discipline that describes the human condition.
Okay.
Right? Because I remember a friend of mine had a roommate. He was totally grounded in the rational scientific truth. And he would even say, there's no such thing as love. It's just chemical reactions to other chemical reactions in other people.
His wife was just
he was single.
Enamored. Okay, yeah. He probably still is.
Okay, yeah. Spoiler alert, he was single.
Right.
What's interesting is, now I think last I heard, now he's married and has kids. And he's not such a big believer in just that everything's just biology, chemical reactions, and that's all there is. You know, exactly. He actually believes in something higher, something philosophical called love, that made him fall in love with his wife and makes him look at his kids now and goes, "That's not just a bundle of cells that I'm having a chemical reaction to. I love this kid."
Right. And even if you believe it, you just can't live that way.
Yeah.
It goes back to that idea of it's not helpful.
The practicality of it. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have a practical outworking, and so you can't live that way. So something's got to be adjusted.
Yeah. You can say you hold that view, but you can't move through life that way.
Right.
Eventually. Or you're just going to die some miserable old grumpy person.
Right.
know?
Yeah. You can deny love or you can deny beauty, but nobody objectively looks at the world that way. There's just no way you can you can possibly say that, well, what happened in World War II Germany, that was just their opinion. And you know what I mean? There are people out there that look at sunsets and are appalled and disgusted by it. And it's like, no, there's not.
Yeah.
There is something universal about beauty, about music. Yeah. Nobody listens to piano keys being mashed randomly and says, oh my gosh, that's moving and stirring.
Yeah.
And so there is something, again, just fundamentally obvious about this idea of beauty, of evil.
Well, just as you said that, I thought about that moment when we were in Meteora in Greece and we were sitting there watching that sun go down.
Right.
In that moment, there was a hush and awe.
Oh, yeah. Dozens and dozens, probably 50, 100 people all around us.
Yeah.
Yep.
And no one was sitting there going, that's just a ball of gas following its rotational course in the universe. Right. And that's all that is.
Also, nobody was saying, hey, everybody be quiet. The sun's about to go down.
No one had to cue it, people. Yeah.
Right. It was a universal expression that we were all united with that, enamored by that sunset.
Yeah.
And that actually points to something. That points to some sort of truth. What is it that drives that?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think we're on the philosophical, I don't know if would you call it a moral level?
A little bit, yeah, because
morality?
I think philosophical, the human condition, morality, virtue, I mean, these are all things that the ancient Greeks tried to develop that was placed higher than the scientific truth, right?
Okay.
And I think there's an argument to be made. You might have people who might flip those two, but still, I think for the ancient Greeks, and I think it still holds today, that people would say, no, we're more than just this scientific, rational creature. There's something more aesthetic to us that experiences awe, that wants to understand how to move through the world. And so the ancient Greek philosophers actually placed philosophy as the highest on the hierarchy.
Sure they would.
Everything filtered down out of philosophy.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they were trying to go, what does it mean to be a virtuous person?
Right.
What does it mean to be a good person? What is the best way to go through this life?
Right.
And that's not scientific.
Sure.
That's philosophical.
Yeah.
That's virtues, right?
Right. Yeah.
Justice, love, things like that.
Right. Well, it sounds like, and here's another spoiler, it sounds like they're trying to establish something close to religion, except through the lens of philosophy, through the confines of philosophy.
Yeah.
Philosophical thought.
And we've talked about this because one reason for that, I think, is that, look, ancient religions did not teach you how to be a better person. It taught you how to not irritate the gods.
Right.
Or it taught you how to manipulate the gods. It was one of those two things, right? That was religion in ancient days.
Yeah.
Don't offend the god, and hey, you can kind of kiss up to this one and you might get something out of them.
Right. You can capture some of their power, some of their favor.
Yeah, but neither of those things made you a better person, which I think is why people like the early philosophers and then Socrates and Plato and Aristotle come along and they're like, no, we need something more than this, right?
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
And it's almost why their philosophy starts to sound more what we would think of as religion than ancient religion did.
Right. It's almost like they saw the gap.
Yeah.
They saw I think they
were trying to fill the gap.
And they were trying to fill that in, which is why they would put that at the top of their hierarchy.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And so as philosophy goes, I mean, the good is it obviously helps explain the universal patterns that we all naturally see, but the problem with it is it doesn't get to the fundamental reason that these things exist in the first place. Why is it that we all agree on the sunset? There's still that why. You know, the 6-year-old constantly infinitely regressing the why, right? Well, why is that? Why is that? You know,
why? And you want to kill that.
Right. That's because the answer is ultimately shut up because I said so.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't get to the fundamental reasons why those things exist in the first place. And so it gets to our final top level of our hierarchy, that at the top of philosophy, as great as it is this kind of spiritual truth, right?
Right.
The spiritual condition, why the world is the way it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because people like Plato and Aristotle, they actually move from language to talking about the gods, plural, to God.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just, they couldn't wrap their arms around it, right? And they basically said, look, there might be this singular God, but we can't really know it or understand it, which I think that's where you see Christianity come on the scene.
Right.
And start, in my opinion, it starts to fill that void that they were observing.
Yeah.
And Christianity comes along and says, no, we can know that God that you are grasping for.
Paul rolls into Athens and says, this unknown God that you're praying to, you can know him, by the way. And so that's exactly what Paul's kind of saying, is that this is a brilliantly educated philosophical society, but I've got one more layer to put on top.
Yeah.
This idea of the unknown God, it can be known, and there is spiritual truth, is what Paul was basically putting out there to him.
Yeah, and we will not steal material for next episode, because that's exactly what we're going to talk about next episode.
Oh, that's right. Okay, there you go. Well, yeah. We jumped the gun.
But that's exactly what we're getting to. So we're saying the top of the hierarchy is spiritual truth.
Right.
Religious truth, you might say.
Yeah. Okay, so the good of that is that it gives us a structure for purpose beyond ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But there is, with every good part, there's a bad part. And the bad part about, I'll say, maybe I won't say spiritual truth, but the problem with religion is it's easily hijacked, it's easily manipulated, since it can't be proven scientifically, since it can't be proven, quote unquote, in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
It's easily hijacked. And so that's where weird cults come along. That's where, these kind of bizarre beliefs, because it's easily hijacked, because it's at the top of the hierarchy, it's not subject to scientific rigor, to scientific testing,
Right.
And so therefore it kind of circles back, or it can be hijacked to circle back to that bottom hierarchy. Well, this is just my opinion. I'm God.
Yeah.
Trust me. I came from the heavens, right? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And so it kind of goes full circle back to the bottom of the hierarchy, which is why it's easily hijacked. And so that's the problem.
Yeah. And along those same lines, there are different religions that say, yes, we possess the truth, right?
Right.
Well, what do you do with all these multiple truth claims. And again, I would say, no, you're thinking about it on the hierarchy wrong. And that's where faith comes in.
Right.
It's not what can be proven. It's actually what corresponds closest to reality. And that's something we're going to get to because I'm really embracing that definition of what truth is.
Right.
And this is not just pragmatic, but it's what religion, it's what the Christian faith, I would say, claims.
Mm-hmm.
But then as you live it out, it actually is what corresponds closest to reality in this world. And that's not always a scientific thing.
That's actually a pretty good definition of truth. It'll be a little bit too squishy.
For some people, yeah.
Well, for really hardcore extremes in any camp. But you can think that you can fly, but that doesn't correspond with reality. And when you try to fight against gravity, you will find that you in and of yourself are unable to do that.
Yeah.
To painful consequences. And so it's like we don't have to get into the whole why I wasn't able to jump and hold my arms out and fly. It's just you can simply say what you believed was untrue because it didn't correspond with the reality that you thought it was going to carry out.
Yeah. So we've established a hierarchy, right? Personal truth, scientific truth, philosophical truth, and now we've said religious truth.
Right.
So obviously let's transition now into what we believe as people of faith, as Christians. Okay. So, because I'm sure that's the question. All right. So what are you guys saying, right? So let's state what we believe, which is that we believe as Christians that there is an ultimate source of truth, and it is found in Yahweh of the Bible, and it is revealed through the incarnation of Jesus.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about spiritual truth. And the reason why we believe that, I would say, is because for 2,000 years, that idea has held the closest we can come to what reality is.
Yeah.
It's the best description of why the universe is here, why we're here, how we can connect to that higher power being God, Yahweh. Right.
And it does seem to be the closest correspondence with actual reality.
Yeah.
And you can, well, we could just go 100 different ways with this. But basically, the more you dig into the Bible, actually, there are people that have dug into the Bible to try to disprove it, to really get down into it and fundamentally disprove it. And they come out and they find out, no, this is actually more complex and more corresponding to reality than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
And so it does. It seems to hold that mantle of truth better than anything else that we've come up with. And since we have this, we're limited to our physical minds, the way we view the world, our subjectivity, and the way we filter objective truth through our subjectivity. So it's never going to be right. We've explained that earlier.
Yeah.
It does seem to be the best explanation that our subjective minds can come up with that corresponds with reality.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because I was going to bring us back to that idea of saying, now look, we're saying there's this objective truth that we hold, but let's be honest also, let's hold the tension of we're standing somewhere. We are not standing nowhere.
Right, exactly.
Which means it is still our subjective, imperfect minds trying to describe this, trying to live it out, right?
Right.
And that's where kind of the tension comes in then. I think that's ultimately what we're saying.
Right. It's a roundabout way of saying, when we say that God is all-knowing, the easy answer to that is, well, God knows everything because he can fast forward and rewind through time and look at this and all this. But I think what we're fundamentally saying is God does have that objective truth. We're filtered through our subjectivity. We'll never be all-knowing.
Yeah.
In obvious ways, because I can't be everywhere at once. But even in my own viewing of truth, it's still filtered through my subjectivity. So even that cannot be all-knowing.
Yeah, God is all-knowing, but I am not.
Right.
Right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And so the mistake that the religious people make is that there is an implication that we may not be all-knowing. I don't think anybody will say that. But
yeah.
In this particular instance, we know this. We know this. The Bible says this.
Yeah.
To go back to the things that divide us in the faith.
Right.
I know that infant baptism works, or I know that, all the things we argue about, right? And I even think on those individual levels, man, be very careful, because we're always filtering through a subjective lens.
Yeah.
There is objective truth, but it's going through a subjective lens.
Yeah. The way to say that, I would say, is almost always hold that belief with some measure of humility. that we are still trying to figure it out as well.
Right.
Why is this hierarchy helpful? Why is thinking in terms of this hierarchy helpful? I can share how it's been helpful for me and what we've discussed, right? So again, we have the hierarchy here.
Right.
Why is this helpful? Well, because it starts to allow you to see the ways that we get the hierarchy wrong.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so there's 2 ways that I wrote down. 2 ways we get the hierarchy wrong. First, we don't acknowledge that there is a hierarchy of truth.
Right.
That's the first one.
Right. You hold to one category and you say, no, this is what's truth. And
Right.
you don't acknowledge there's a hierarchy at all.
Right.
And people of faith and atheists both make this mistake.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they don't acknowledge that there's a hierarchy at all.
And that's where you all of a sudden have religion versus science.
Right.
That's where you have philosophy versus, maybe
Sure,
postmodern.
personal experience
Yeah,
or
personal
whatever.
experience or something. Someone says that's my personal experience, and psychologists want to tear their hair out and go, well, no, 99% of the time, this is the way humans experience this, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
right.
where you get these conflicts, right?
Right.
And to me, it actually helps me understand, okay, when I see this conflict happening, someone's pitting the hierarchies against each other.
Right.
Or there's not acknowledgement that there is a hierarchy.
Right. Well, when you pit them against each other, it's an implicit acknowledgement that the hierarchy doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the modern problem that we're seeing in our world today is a completely inverted hierarchy.
Okay, that's the second.
Well, okay, so I stole that. But anyway, yeah.
Well, let's go there, yeah.
Well, that the pyramid is flipped upside down.
Yeah, exactly.
And that your personal experience is all that matters. And if you want to believe in God or not, that's your business, but that's at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Don't try to push it on anybody else. There's not really anything you can do with that other than feel all warm and fuzzy inside and feel virtuous and righteous. But all that really matters is, science is definitely over that. Philosophy's over that. And at the top of the hierarchy is my personal feelings.
Yeah.
That's my subjective.
Yeah. So
truth.
you see the hierarchy get inverted, where my personal feelings ultimately define the entire universe, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or we've seen examples of where science gets at the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
And now there is no such thing as religion and it's all just what can be factually proven.
Right.
And that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
And we also see this again, go back to ancient Greece, we see where philosophy becomes the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
And everything else is subject to that.
And the thing is that for a time, for its golden age, that does seem true. You could see the philosophers were continually climbing up that mountain, forming this worldview that they were really close to saying, I think this is going to explain it all. But
Yeah.
you get to the top and it starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
When it comes to the fundamental reason why the beauty exists in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And you see scientists do the same thing. Like, I think we're close. I think we're almost there. Give it another 10 years, we're going to have cancer whipped. We're going to have truly unbiased artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
We're going to have, and it's the whole flying car fallacy. You assume that this is going to move forward in a linear way. And man, if we got these really efficient cars in the 70s and 80s, man, just wait till 2000. We'll be flying around.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it all seems to kind of fall apart at the end. And it's because you're putting all your energy and all your faith in one level of the hierarchy, and you're not moving up to the next level.
Yeah.
Because at some point, science stops and philosophy starts to take over.
Yeah.
And at some point, philosophy stops, can't carry on the conversation anymore.
Right.
And faith and spiritual truths have to take over.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. I like the way that's laid out.
Yeah. And so I guess to get really personal and practical, I would say here's how it helps me. It helps me see some of these things that I would have been conflicted with in the past.
Yeah.
It helps me see them in their proper perspective. And look, I think part of the mistake that religious people have made in the last 400 or 500 years is we actually put our faith and we put the Bible at the level of the scientific hierarchy.
Right.
And so that's where we get into all these arguments.
Right.
Right? So was it 7-day creation or was it not? Was
Right.
there a global flood? Was there an actual King David? Was
Right.
there an Exodus? Or
And
was it
goes
just
back
this?
to the Earth is the center of the universe. It has to be.
Yeah, yeah.
The heliocentric versus the what was the anyway? Why they locked Galileo up, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, but so it's not like any of this stuff is new. That religious beliefs conflicted with scientific beliefs.
Yeah.
And because you can look back, and you hear atheists do it all the time, they point back, well, they locked up Galileo over this. because you guys thought you were right, and it turns out that your religious views were wrong.
Yeah.
And even that is a misunderstanding of there is a hierarchy, and we were not in our lane. I don't think they used that language back there. That's what Galileo could have said. Look, stay in your lane, right? You've got a place in the what?
I'm sure ancient roads with horses had lanes. Otherwise, it would have been chaos, right?
Yeah, you're right. So, yeah. So, yes,
stay in your rut, right? Stay in your rut.
Stay in your rut. Maybe that was it.
That the carriage wheel would have formed on the brick.
Everybody knows that, right? Yeah. But that's what Galileo was basically saying to the church. Stay in your lane. There's a place for religious truth, but you're trying to push your spiritual truth down, force it down into the realm of science. And it's like, no, remember the hierarchy.
Yeah. I think that's hierarchical confusion. Is that maybe a word? But I think what you're getting at and where it's helped me is, so, first, I don't bring the Bible down to the level of science. Now, it's not to say that there's a lot of history, there's a lot of things that archaeology has actually affirmed and said, yep, this actually plays out. But what we're saying is there's something higher. So here's a personal example. Whether or not there was a global flood is not on the same level on the hierarchy to me as whether Jesus rose from the grave.
Right.
I can have my opinions on how to read Genesis, right?
Right.
And sometimes they've changed. Sometimes they're always growing. Science chimes in sometimes. Archaeology chimes in. But look, that used to shake me up. But I'm not equating any of that with the fact that ultimately at the top of the hierarchy, I believe that Jesus is God's son and he rose from the grave.
Right.
And conquered death.
Yeah.
And I don't confuse the two anymore.
Right.
That's how it's helped me personally.
Right. You're right. To go back to that idea of truth, when somebody provides evidence contrary to what you believe, it's a little bit jarring.
Yeah.
But once you see the hierarchy, the reason it's jarring is because you're trying to pull it down to the personal, right? And you see this in the church all the time. My goodness. That, well, I don't think Jesus would be this type of person. This doesn't feel right. I want a Jesus that feels good to me.
Yeah.
And so all you're doing is shrinking him down and yanking religion
pulling,
down to the personal level.
You're pulling him down the hierarchy.
Right.
Yeah,
and so we do
exactly.
this. Yeah, we do this all the time. And so you're right. It doesn't have to be jarring. It can. It can be problematic. You got to work these things out. Kind of, you feel like you got to fix the foundation a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those fundamental things can be adjusted. And I don't know if there were podcasts done about the heliocentric view and fighting against it back in Galileo's day. But I'm sure that there are people that were fundamentally jarred spiritually the more that science, quote unquote, proved that the earth revolves around the sun and that the sun and all the other planets don't revolve around the earth.
Yeah. And when science proves something like that, it doesn't have to jar your faith.
Right. It just exposes how, whoops, I had the hierarchy wrong.
Yeah.
I was trying to pull the scientific down or trying to pull the spiritual truth down to the personal level because it felt better. And it does, I'm sure that's what it was. We never found anything in the Bible that stated that. It just felt better that if man is the highest creation, of course, everything revolves around the earth. But that wasn't actually right. It just felt that way.
And it also allows parts of the Bible to be what they were supposed to be. It doesn't make the whole Bible a scientific textbook.
Right.
It allows it to be what it is.
Right. And that's a lot of what we're doing on this podcast is when you kind of strip away a lot of the opinions and maybe the way you were raised in church and actually get to what the Bible's saying. I think that you can read the Bible several different ways through several different lenses that are actually helpful. And so we bring in mythology sometimes. We bring in philosophy.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Right. And so that's what we're trying to do is trying to kind of strip away a lot of these opinion things that maybe we were raised with and to try to say, well, what is it really trying to say? And having this hierarchy of truth actually helps see that.
Yeah.
And so kind of to summarize.
Yeah.
You have that hierarchy of truth. There are levels to it. There are proper places for those levels. All of them have their proper existence because there is a personal truth that I experience.
Yeah.
But it has to have its proper place also in the hierarchy. And a lot of what we're trying to do is simply work out what truth is through the existence of that hierarchy. So that helps. And then the other thing that we mentioned that really helps me in this particular episode is the idea that there is objective truth out there And I say out there for a certain reason.
Okay, yeah.
But it can only be processed subjectively. So once it goes through my filter, my mind, my fallible, corrupted flesh, that it's not going to be perfect. And it doesn't mean I can't be more right or more wrong about an opinion, but it's going to be subjective. And so the idea that there's objective truth, yes, absolutely. But can I grasp that objective truth? I think the answer is it's always going to be processed through my subjectivity. Maybe I'll say it that way.
Yeah. I like that phrase, you're standing somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no way to look at something from nowhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's the people that think they can see objective truth, philosophically, they're creating that fallacy. Yeah. You can't see something from nowhere.
Yeah.
All right. I like that.
Yeah. So my big takeaway is that Socrates was the original podcaster. Only his innovation was he did it live, which we used to call a conversation with actual people.
Right. Yeah. Well,
But it got him killed. So
there was the woke mob back then too, man. They're trying to shut down free speech.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not a new problem. So when you look at the world and say, man, this whole thing's messed up and upside down, the more we talk about it, the more it's like, well, they kind of had this problem back in Jesus' day or Plato's day or, the Roman time. Sure.
Yeah. No, in all seriousness, my takeaway, I think, is kind of what you just alluded to, is that viewing truth this way actually keeps me seeking truth. It never allows me to stay in one place and say, yep, that's it.
No, that's a great point. I didn't think about that.
And so it keeps me as a continual learner, a seeker. And look, if I'm on the right path, I'm just going to go further down the path, right? It's not like I'm going to get derailed and go another way. It's
correspond to reality.
Yeah.
Right.
But it keeps me seeking. And it helps me not get bogged down in some of these arguments, but it keeps me hungry and seeking. And I think that's helpful for me.
And ultimately humble,
Yeah.
That is probably a pretty strong sign that if you're absolutely certain about this, let that be a red flag. It's subjective. You're still processing it subjectively.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get it absolutely perfectly correct.
Yeah. And again, there's a reason we call it faith.
Yeah.
Not fact.
And it's why faith has to come in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So hopefully that was helpful. We're going to continue this next episode by talking about Paul's message to the Areopagus.
Yeah.
So that should be cool too.
Yep. Well, I got to catch a plane, so we can't do it now.
We do. So we got to wrap up real quick here. If you enjoyed this, give us likes. We'll put links in the show notes, Facebook page, fan list, anything like that. And we will talk to you next episode.
Yep. Great talking to you. Good to be here live. We'll see you.